English-speaking virtual tasting. As always, we are using this time to really hone our tasting skills using the WSET systematic approach to tasting for levels 2 and levels 3, with the idea to be connecting the theory about the wines, so what's happening in the vineyards, in the winemaking, the natural and human factors, to what we can actually taste in the glass. And I was thinking after last week's session that I talk a lot about level 3, because so many of you I know are preparing for the level 3 exam. So I have tended to focus on the level 3 approach in a little bit more detail. But I wanted to say that just because those of you who are studying level 2, there isn't a tasting exam, it doesn't make this session, this connection between tasting and theory, any less important for you. Okay, just because you're not going to be able to show off your tasting skills in an exam doesn't mean you shouldn't continue always trying to make these connections between what is in the glass and what you know about the wine, or using the wine to learn, to be a detective, to find out about what has happened in the theory. You know, because for level 2, we're really laying those foundations of how to taste and how to make these connections, so that by the time you get to level 3, it's already second nature. So I just wanted to say that for those of you who are working on the level 2, that whilst I might constantly say in these tastings, oh, it's really important for level 3 to know this, that this is still useful information for you. It's just that right now you're not going to put it to practice in your exam. And those of you who are thinking of moving on to the level 3, we have got a course running in July. We're very fortunate to have a large enough space at the Italian Wine Academy to run courses in the classroom with enough social distance for you guys and for me and the team to be safe. Okay, so from the 1st until the 5th of July, we have our next level 3 course. And we also have a level 2 course in the classroom from the 19th till the 21st of June. I'll repeat that at the end because I want to dive into the wine because I'm quite excited about today. Like I said last week, I'm going to take you on a journey down south to look at the Feudi di San Gregorio Greco di Tufo DOCG, and this is the 2018. Okay. So this is 100% Greco. Okay. Now, something that many people get wrong is referring to the grape variety as Greco di Tufo. This is not actually correct. Greco di Tufo is the denomination. Okay? Greco, only Greco is the grape variety. And as usual, we're using this tasting to explore a single expression of this. The DOCG actually allows 15% of Cos'è di Volpe, which is another local grape variety. But Feudi di San Gregorio are using this in purezza, so 100%. And I think this will really allow us to get to grips with what Greco is really about. So a little bit about the site and then the winemaking before I set up the expectations of what we might see in the glass. So Campagna, obviously hot and dry. And Tufo in particular, this area of the denomination is really focused on these volcanic soils. Okay? And a lot of people talk about volcanic soils, the importance for volcanic soils on wine style, the impact they could potentially have on wine. There is a lot of buzz about volcanic wines at the moment and what potentially you get from the soil. And the theory is, and I say theory because terroir, this idea of the connection between soil and what we taste in the glass is very difficult to quantify. But the idea is that we get this increased minerality, kind of steely character, flinty notes. And you quite often see this expressed, particularly in white grape varieties from volcanic soils. So those of you who've had the Etna Bianco DOC wines, for example, may have noticed this kind of steely, flinty character. It's also what we find in similar soils around the world, where we've had this kind of volcanic eruption and this volcanic ash and material, this layering of mineral composites. Okay. So we might be looking for this in the wine. The other thing about where Feudi di San Gregorio are situated, where they grow their Greco vines, is they're really relying on these river valleys to channel sea breezes into their vineyards, okay? Because it is hot during the summer. And remember, we want to maintain freshness, acidity. We want to moderate this influence. We talk a lot at level 2 and level 3 about what the moderating influences on vineyards are. And here it really is taking those sea breezes and channeling them up into the vineyards to keep the grapes cool. And this is particularly helpful overnight. Remember, we talk about this cool nighttime temperature being important for maintaining acidity and complexity in wines. The other thing that this does is potentially helps move any moisture. So Greco, and we're going to talk quite a bit about how Greco expresses itself, but one of the things to know about it is it's a very late ripener, okay? Often the end of October. So if you have a rainy season, if you have some moisture around, particularly, you know, in the mornings when you've got dew, having this flow of air through your vineyards just gives you a little bit more help, yeah? Because it's a late ripener that is disease prone. So you don't want any of that moisture sitting around. Usually in Campania, this isn't a problem, but it just gives the winemaker an extra security blanket. Okay. So in terms of the winemaking, stainless steel for 4 months after fermentation, so mature, it's left in stainless steel, temperature controlled fermentation. So we're looking at that 12 to 22 degrees that you'd be expecting for white wines. But the important thing is that they leave the lees in contact with the juice for this 4 months. Okay? So you're getting 4 months of lees aging with this wine. So you're adding a little bit of texture potentially to the wine. Okay, as well as adding the flavors, the aromas that you get from lees. So this pastry, this dough, this yeasty characteristic. And thinking about Greco as a grape variety. So I've already said it's a late ripener and it does like these mineral soils, yeah, these volcanic soils. It oxidizes easily, okay? So contact with oxygen is very tricky when you're making Greco wine. So you want to be using anaerobic fermentation. You want to be in steel. You want to be temperature controlled and very little oxygen contact. And one of the things that lees is helping to do is helping with this potential. Okay, it's just giving a little bit of extra stability in the wine, which is something we'll talk about when we consider the aging potential. Okay. Couple of other interesting things about Greco. It's got a high polyphenolic context component. Okay? So it has lots of polyphenols. This is what gives Greco its texture. It is incredibly well known as a textural wine. Okay, so you should be able to feel in your mouth that you're tasting Greco. It's what makes it such a great exam wine quite often, because you should be able to recognize it from this oily slickness in your mouth. It's also high acid, which can potentially help balance with this big weight and texture you could get. And in terms of aromas and flavors, can be very broad. So with Tufo, we're looking for this contrast, this complementing of these mineral, flinty, steely characters with maybe ripe tropical fruit, stone fruit, floral characters, white flowers. I often find white peaches, this combination of something floral and something stone fruit. So in terms of what we expect in the glass, potentially from Tufo, these volcanic sites, and particularly from Feudi di San Gregorio with this extra ability to maintain acidity, we're thinking about steely mineral acid notes in the wine. Okay, so a steely mineral aroma and flavor and potentially high acidity. From the winemaking, we're not looking for oak character, and it's a 2018, so we're not looking for age, but we are looking for the impact of this lees aging. It's only 4 months, but it should have an impact. And then finally from the grape, that's where a lot of this wine is coming from. Okay, it's getting the texture, the acidity, the aromas and flavors. There's a lot going on in this grape potentially already. So those of you who are ready, let's dive in. I'm hoping that my talking to you for this amount of time means that you've had a chance for the wine to get a little bit warmer. It's really important not to taste white wines too cold, because cold suppresses flavors and aromas. So if you're taking this straight out of the fridge at 5 to 8 degrees, you're not necessarily going to get the best from it, not least because this is likely to be a fuller bodied wine potentially. And remember, for your service temperatures, particularly for level 2, those fuller bodied wines, you want to be at that slightly warmer temperature. Yeah, you don't want them at 8 to 10 degrees, you want them in that kind of 11 to 13 degree bracket. Okay, so let's have a taste. So the color, very, very straightforward. We're looking at clear, pale lemon. As I said, you will get fed up with tasting WSET wines that are white and are clear, pale lemon. Let's have a smell. So you can see how far away I am from the glass on this. Now, my wine has been out of the fridge about 15-20 minutes, but I'm getting so much positive aromas quite a long way away from the glass. You know, and remember, when we're thinking about intensity, you're not looking for the alcohol, you're looking for those positive fruit characteristics. Okay? So all the way away from the glass, pronounced, no arguments there on level 2 and level 3. And there's a lot going on. Okay. So the first thing that I get is floral characters. I really associate this wine with white jasmine, and then this kind of white peach, this stone fruit, but floral stone fruit. And then I begin to get these steely characters. Okay, so flint or graphite. Quite often I talk about when you sharpen a pencil and you have the pencil shavings. That's very much what I associate this kind of graphite aroma with. And I'm also getting a little bit of unripe pear. Okay. So it's got a lot going on. We've got flowers, we've got stone fruit, we've got pear, we've got this steel. It's really quite impressive. What's interesting for me is that I don't smell the lees. I don't find the lees particularly apparent on the aromas of this wine. I don't get a strong yeast, I don't get dough. It's all dominated by the fruit and floral. Okay. So for me on the nose, it's all those primary characteristics. And for those of you working with level 3, this is a youthful wine. Okay. So let's have a taste. And as usual, I'm going to ask you to think about tasting in these clusters to really focus your palate. Okay. So we'll do sweetness and acidity first. And then we'll begin to look at alcohol and body, and also potentially texture, okay? Because although the SATs for level 2 and level 3 don't necessarily ask you for texture, I like to encourage my students to make the most complete note about the wine, okay? I think this is good practice for your own tasting notes, is for you to fully understand the wine, whether the SAT asks for it or not. Okay? So let's have a taste. As I took another smell before I tasted, this jasmine aroma is really becoming very, very strong as the wine warms up. Okay, so it's dry and the acidity is high. Okay, remember I talk about how much saliva is in your mouth, and if you're uncertain, tipping your head forward and really thinking about how much saliva is running to the front of your mouth. Okay. There is so much saliva in my mouth with this wine that there's no doubt about the acidity. And that's great. That's exactly what I'd expect. And for me, that is what really aids the balance of this wine. Because I want you to taste again and think about alcohol and body and texture. Okay, try and put the acidity out of your mind. Remember, If you're struggling with things like body, hold the wine in your mouth without running the air through it, and just let it sit in your mouth for a little while. Okay. So the alcohol on this wine is medium, which is really great because sometimes Greco has a tendency, like with its counterpart Fiano, to have these high alcohol levels. And this doesn't. It doesn't feel warm in the back of my throat. There's just a slight sensation that there is alcohol there, which is what puts it in that medium bracket. And actually it's 12.5, so that's perfect. But what really stands out is the body and the texture. Okay. It's not quite at full. If you think about comparing this, for those of you who've tasted the oaked Chardonnays of Southern Burgundy or of California or of Australia, they with that real thick richness, okay? Often also Fiano has this like really thick body. This is not so much full-bodied, okay? It's medium for your level 2. It's medium plus for your level 3. Remember, you have that extra bracket of nuance. Make use of it. Okay? But the thing that gives it that extra weight is this texture. You can really feel this oily slick in your mouth. For those of you who've managed to get it up in your gums, there is a little bit of polyphenolic texture. It's not tannic, but there is a little bit of that kind of drying, oily, it sort of contrasts with the oily texture on your palate is the slight drying on the gums, okay? Which is what makes the high acidity even more important. Okay, if you think about very, very full-bodied wines, if they don't have that acidity, you think about how cloying they are in your mouth. It's similar to this idea of sweet wines needing the acidity to balance them. And that's exactly what we need in this wine. Okay. So medium for your level 2, medium plus on your body for level 3. Taste again and think about your flavors. Remember, think about the intensity, so how much of the flavors there are in your mouth, the types of flavor, and then after you've spat your wine or drunk your wine, no judgment, have a think about how long these positive characteristics last, okay? Not the acidity, not the texture, but the aromas and flavors lasting on your palate. Okay. So for me, the palate really matches the nose. It's pronounced. There is a lot of concentration of flavors. And this is where the lees just begins to come out for me, particularly on the finish. It's combined with a kind of white peach, almost honeyed characteristic of this wine to give this kind of peach pie kind of note on the finish. Also the floral delicacy really stands out once you've spat the wine out. I think you begin to get that in even greater detail. This real kind of interplay between the stone fruit and the flowers. So it's pronounced with a long finish. Okay. And even now I'm still particularly that, like I say, that jasmine note and that slight hint of lees. The lees I think are very well done in this wine because they're aiding the texture that's already there. They're giving this kind of gentle sort of softness to the body of the wine, and it just enough of their character. So this subtle pastry note without being overwhelming. Okay, it's really, really delicate, the lees on this wine. They're really relying on the grape variety to do the work, and I think that's really quite nice because you don't have this overpowering bread note that you sometimes get with lees wines. And that's to be expected. It's only 4 months, and there's been no batonnage. There's been no stirring of the lees, which gives you this extra contact. So thinking about our quality scale, remember this Blick scale of balance, length, intensity, complexity. I've talked a lot about the balance between the acidity, the weight. We know we've got length. We know we've got intensity, and we've definitely got complexity. You know, we're looking at flowers, we're looking at stone fruit, we've got pear as well as peach, you've got jasmine, you've got flint, you know, plus on the palate you've got this added bonus of the lees character. So for me, this is an outstanding wine. And then we get to the really interesting thing about Greco, which is the suitability for aging. Okay? I know many people struggle with how to determine, particularly in white wines, okay, whether or not there would be suitability for aging. Okay? And what you really need to think about is whether the wine will positively develop, okay, as the wine ages. And does it have enough of the components that are going to be changed by the aging process to still be good? Okay. So in this case, we've got high acidity. So even if the flavors become more concentrated, we've still got that refreshing acidity. We do have texture. Okay, we have body, we have weight in this wine, backed up by complexity and concentration on the palate. Okay. And I said on the palate that I was beginning to get this gentle honeyed character. For me, this is what will really begin to beautifully develop with the wine. Okay. So I think given 3 to 5 years, I'm not talking decades, but given 3 to 5 years, you will see this development of this honeyed characteristic, this gentle drying of the fruits, but you've still got this minerality. So you're still going to maintain some freshness. So for me, this Greco di Tufo is definitely drink now, but suitable for aging. And when you're giving your assumptions for that, you can think about what is going to improve about this wine. Okay? It's still going to maintain all that acidity that makes it refreshing, but it's got these characters, this texture, this concentration, this intensity, all of this fruit character that will develop positively. Thinking about stone fruits becoming a little bit more into dried fruit, this note of dried peaches, these lees becoming potentially a little bit more noticeable, this honeyed character developing. So that's my assessment of the wine. I hope you've managed to enjoy the wine. I think this is a really interesting example, particularly of a wine that is drinking so well now. You know, you can open this wine and just enjoy it this evening, no problem. But in 3 years' time, you can open this wine and you'll still be able to enjoy it. And I think that's the real joy of particularly well-made Greco di Tufo. I will take your opinions, no doubt, and your questions in the chat if anybody has any. Otherwise, I hope you'll just continue enjoying the wine. Ah, here we go. Some of you had questions prepared. I see you, Luca. I see you typing. Yes. So Luca is asking about using words that are not necessarily in the aroma clusters. Let me see if I have them here, yeah. But you still have the option to talk about things that are floral and things that are other, okay? And I would argue that if you're worried about it, if you taste it and smell it, then write it down. Because as an examiner, I am gonna write down everything that I could possibly get from this wine. So if I think it's white peach, I'm gonna have white peach and peach. If I think it's flinty, I will also have flint, mineral, steel, graphite, because it's so subjective how I describe something to how you describe something. I really, as examiners, we really want to give you the marks because we understand that, you know, you have picked up the same thing, you've just used a different term for it. Jasmine is a white flower. If you'd have just had blossom, you've got the mark. If you've got white flowers, if you've got white blossom, anything in that kind of cluster, you're getting the mark. So I hope that's helpful. Elisa, yeah, for me, the error, it would be an error to say that it is very good, because for me, it doesn't lack anything on the intensity scale. I have balance, I have length, I have intensity, I have complexity. So for me, there isn't anything that gives this wine something. I always, when I'm giving my quality note, will also say why. For example, because if an examiner understands that, and this is good practice for those of you going forward to the diploma, where you will be asked to give reasoning, it just gives me an idea of what you were thinking in your note. Because I will be expecting you to find the balance between the acidity and the texture. But you know, it's 1 mark, so don't worry too much, because you've got all the other stuff there. If you've given me a great tasting note, but your assessment of quality is 1 point off the scale, then I still know you've understood the wine. Carlos, yes, pronounced both on the nose and the palate. Remember, for me, when I'm smelling this wine, and it is not too warm, okay, it's been out of the fridge 15 minutes, I'm right here. You know, I'm a full kind of almost inch away when I'm getting those positive characteristics. Okay, remember, if you're a centimeter or more away, you're looking at pronounced. If you're just on the edge of the glass, you're looking in that medium bracket. Remember, you've got nuance if you're in level 3. And if you've got your nose in the glass, that's when you're thinking about it's going to be light, because you're searching for it. Okay. So next week we have a really interesting Morellino di Scanzano. Okay. This will be a great opportunity for those of you who tasted Brunello with me to think about impact of climate on grape variety. Okay, so those of you who tasted the Brunello, keep your note if you've still got it, bring it with you, because we're going to talk about Morellino di Scanzano being from a slightly warmer climate, okay, and what impact that particularly has on Sangiovese. Okay. I believe we're at 6:30 again next week. It seemed to work really well for everyone. If you have any questions, fire them to us in the meantime. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your Greco, and I'll see you next week for another English-speaking virtual tasting. Don't forget to look on the website for the dates in June for level 2 and July for level 3. I'll be back in the classroom. I can't wait. Ciao.